Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I am back with a Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3 breakdown video. In these videos, I go through the episode scene by scene, and I let you know my thoughts, previous setups and foreshadows, as well as future hints on what we can expect for the upcoming episodes. Now with this episode in particular, there was a lot of finality to it. It was the culmination of the Night King, and it ended with his defeat. Because it's clear that now they're going to focus on the main villain of the show, and that is Cersei. But this episode starts off with Sam, and just like every other character at Winterfell, he is cold and he's scared. And we get a great shot going between Sam, Tyrion, and Bran, showing them set up for the Night King's arrival. And we see everyone else get into position. We see Davos stand along the battlements, Arya and Sansa looking off in the distance, as well as people outside of the wall, ready their armies. Grey Worm's leading the Unsullied, Brienne, Jaime, and Pod are on the left flank, and the Hound walks to the front of the army with Gendry, Tormund, Beric, Dolorous Ed, and Sam. And it was great to see Jorah on the front lines with Ghost. And I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more of Ghost in the last 3 episodes of the show. And I really like how they've been making his presence known, and it speaks to Ghost's importance. What's so great about Ghost is that he's a representation of Jon himself. First of all, the name, Ghost. Jon was killed and resurrected by Melisandre. In other words, a ghost. Ghost's eyes are red, showing that who he is, the inside of what makes up Ghost, is fire, like Jon or Targaryen. But the exterior of Ghost is white, like a Stark representing ice. And that's how Jon was raised, and that's what Jon identifies as, a wolf. And I think it's the duality of Jon that makes him such a significant character. Daenerys is represented by her dragons, and even though Jon is also our Targaryen, he's represented by a direwolf, because he represents both. He's the bridge between everything, and it's the same with religion. The old gods and the Lord of Light usually have prophecies that lead to Jon Snow. Melisandre had her faith in Jon. She believed in Jon, and she resurrected Jon from the dead. And then we have Bran, whose sole purpose is to go back and reflect on his brother Jon and his past, and his significance to come during the last war, and his destiny to sit upon the throne. And I'm sure we'll see more of that unfold in future episodes, especially since there's an underlying plot that Jon is Targaryen, and Daenerys knows it. We'll see what Daenerys does with that information, and how that complicates their relationship and who will sit on the Iron Throne. But then after all that preparation, we see Melisandre arrive at Winterfell. She gets the Dothraki to raise their swords, and she lights them on fire. Melisandre went to Essos, so I think this suggests that she learned this ability to light things on fire, because that's what she did the majority of this episode. Another thing is that she could have also been refining what she sees, her prophecy. And when she arrives at Winterfell, she clearly sees Arya, really going back to what she told Arya in Season 3. But I think we also get a key hint at the future when Melisandre goes by Grey Worm and says Valar Morghulis, and Grey Worm responds saying Valar Dohaeris. One means all men must die, the other one means all men must serve. And I honestly think this foreshadows Grey Worm's death. Why did Melisandre pick Grey Worm, of all people, to say this to? It could be a thing that Melisandre says to Grey Worm because he's going in battle to fight against the dead. But I think it foreshadows Grey Worm serving Daenerys to try and have his queen sit the throne, and he will die trying to get that to happen. He will never end up getting the future that he wants with Missandei. And then the attack happens. We see the Dothraki charge into battle. And I love this shot when we see the light of their swords slowly start to diminish, and Daenerys has to sit and watch her army be turned into dead. And this is significant because this is one half of Daenerys' significant army. Daenerys has her dragons, she has the Dothraki, as well as she has the Unsullied. And we saw the Dothraki get completely decimated in this scene. And this is exactly what Cersei wanted. Her plan was to stay south and let the Night King take out her enemies. And the dead have crippled Daenerys to the point where it's going to be very hard to fight Cersei and to win back that Iron Throne. Daenerys will have her 2 dragons and the Unsullied, and Jon will have the Northerners, the Wildlings, and support from the Vale. I think facing Cersei head-on isn't enough, and I think Daenerys is going to have to rely on her dragons. And I think that's going to put her in a position Tyrion warned her about. It's going to make her look like her father, the Mad King, and it's possible it could lead to Daenerys' demise. Bran has seen a dragon fly over Winterfell. Tyrion has had countless conversations with Daenerys, warning her not to burn cities to the ground like her father. But she'll be forced to because of the situation Cersei has led her to. And we'll finish with this scene where King's Landing is burnt to the ground and winter has arrived. But because the Dothraki get killed, Daenerys leaves her post to fight off the Whites. And Jon does the same. But what's interesting with Jon is he stays very close by Bran. It just speaks to Jon's closeness with his family and how important it is to him to make sure that they're safe. But before Jon goes to the Godswood, he first tries to kill some White Walkers. But a storm comes in, and this just shows the strength of the Night King and his army. They could bring in a storm that makes it very difficult for Jon and Daenerys to see. Makes it hard for them to see the signal to light the trench. And it makes the battle that much more complicated. And it really stacks the odds in the Night King's favor. And because the storm gets intense, Arya tells Sansa to seek cover. Jorah ends up falling off his horse and he has to fight on foot. And we also see Sam get knocked down, but saved by Dolorous Edd. But we see him get killed and lose his life. And this is a character that's been with us for a while. So it's sad to see him go, but we're going to see his send-off in the next episode, when his body is burned along with all the dead of Winterfell. But because of the storm, we again go back to Jon and Daenerys, and we see them flying their dragons and they end up crashing into each other. And I think this is more than just to convey that they're disoriented and they can't see. I think it's symbolism to how their relationship is. We started this season and these characters were falling in love with each other, but things have been greatly complicated because Jon found out he's a legitimate Targaryen. It puts these characters on an equal playing field. And being Queen of the Seven Kingdoms is all Daenerys ever wanted. So naturally these characters are going to be at ends with each other. Because there may be some situations where Jon doesn't agree with Daenerys' leadership style. And there's some times where he had to counsel Daenerys from doing something rash. And there's also other elements at play that could push these characters apart. What if the Targaryen secret got out and some people wanted to support Jon over Daenerys? We know that Jon doesn't want to be king, but we know that power resides where men believe it resides. If the secret gets out and people start flocking to Jon's claim, that's a conflict between these characters that they didn't even mean to create. And we see that this secret might get out through Tyrion. We see him notice that there's a conflict between Daenerys and Jon, and then we see him immediately communicate to Bran. He may be clever enough to figure out Jon Snow's secret, and we might find that out in an upcoming episode. But the battle does continue to get more intense, and Jon stays by the Godswood to keep Bran safe. We also see everyone retreating back to Winterfell, including the Hound. We see Arya aiming her arrow almost at the Hound, but then we see that she ends up saving him. And I think this episode handled the Hound and Arya very well. We know the experience that these characters went through, and we know that they developed a type of bond. The Hound is a very hardened and broken individual. And I think he found a relationship with Arya that he never had with anyone else before. And it's nice to see in this scene that Arya does show that respect, even though it's as simple as keeping him alive. Because he did teach Arya a lot. And much like how Beric's role was to keep Arya alive to kill the Night King, we know that the Hound has a purpose. And I think he already fulfilled some of it by helping Arya be the person who she was meant to become. I think in a very unique way, based on the relationship, when Arya was becoming faceless, it was more than her brothers and sisters that made her choose to be a Stark. I think the Hound humanized her. He helped contribute to her deciding not to be faceless. And that led to the outcome we see in this episode. But then we see the battle escalate further and they need to light the trench. Because of the storm, Daenerys can't see the signal, so they have to light it manually. I love seeing this scene because it had high stakes as people tried to light the trench. And then we see Melisandre go out and do what she does best, light things on fire, and she ends up lighting the trench and saving everyone in the castle. But then we go check on our characters in the crypt. Tyrion is there anxiously because he wants to help, he wants to do something to contribute. But Sansa basically says that he can't do anything. And the most heroic thing he can do, and they all can do, is to look at truth straight in the face. And the reality is that they can't do anything. That's why they're in the crypts. But I like this scene between Sansa and Tyrion because these characters have the same strengths, or similar strengths. They're not useless, they're just not fighters. Their strengths lie with people, with politics, with being able to get what they want. And I hope that that scene was in place to foreshadow that. Clearly Tyrion is on a redemptive arc. He's made some mistakes in the past. And that's why Jorah spoke to Daenerys defending Tyrion. Because he did make a mistake, but Tyrion always learns from them. And I can guarantee you when they're facing off against Cersei, Tyrion is going to come up with an idea or do something that's going to have giant stakes in defeating his sister. And Sansa is going to be useful in other ways. In this discussion with Tyrion, she's made it very clear she does not support Daenerys. She wants the North to be independent. And she feels that way because she loves and respects her people and her family. But Sansa's learned from the best. She plays every situation in her mind. Just like Littlefinger. She sees every possibility. She sees everything at its worst. And she sees what Daenerys could be at her worst. And that's probably why she doesn't support her. And we've seen countless times where Daenerys could be seen or equated to her father. So I think this show has very high stakes. The fight against the Night King and the fight against Cersei. And I think Sansa is going to be the only key player who is playing a political game. And that game would be very significant if she found out her brother Jon was a Targaryen. She could conspire, she could manipulate right under everyone's nose to make sure her brother sits on the throne. Because Jon would never do that himself. He needs his family. And that's what Arya reminded Jon in the first episode of this season. But then from there we go into the Godswood and we see some great scenes between Theon and Bran. Because we know Theon dies in this episode defending his brothers and sisters essentially. He's trying to make peace and make amends for the actions he did in the past, and Bran gives him that. He tells Theon that everything he did brought him to where he is now, where he belongs, and that's home. But then Bran says he has to leave, and he ends up warging. And I guess Bran is just keeping an eye on the Night King. And from there we see the Night King command his force to make a bridge to get through the trench and to attack Winterfell. But the key thing with Bran is that he has this conversation with many people. It's not about what they did, it's about what they've become. And he had that conversation with Jaime. Jaime pushing Bran out that window made Jaime who he is today. And now that's somebody who has a significant role to play in the last war against his sister. But then we see the Whites start to attack Winterfell and everyone's starting to get into place. We see some very touching scenes, like we see Jorah put his hand on Sam and bring him to a safe place. I thought that was a great background scene, because these characters have built a relationship with one another. We also see Jaime and Brienne fighting together and protecting each other as they're defending the walls of Winterfell. And while everyone's fighting, we see the Hound freaking out because we know he has a fear of fire. And I love this scene because the Hound is cowering and Beric's trying to get the Hound to help fight. And the Hound is so defeated, saying that they can't beat death, but then Beric points at Arya, which kind of hints at her motto, what do you say to death? Not today. But I love how the Hound's immediate instinct is to snap out of being a coward and to go save Arya. And I think that speaks volumes to how the Hound feels about her. And then as the threat continues to grow, we see Arya have her amazing fight scene, which I thought was awesome. She could actually detach the dagger from the staff, which is very interesting. We see Lyanna Mormont get killed by the giant, but she ends up killing it as well in the end. So we'll finish this show with House Mormont being completely defeated, which shows that the North and all of Westeros has a lot of rebuilding to do after Cersei is defeated. We then see a scene that slows down the action when Arya is disoriented and is trying to hide from the Whites. They shot it like they almost hear the blood on the floor, but I find it funny how they didn't hear her sneaking up on the Night King. But I think that foreshadows more to this scene.
You used to be taller.
How did you sneak up on me?
But I'll get more into that later. But then after Arya escapes, we see Beric fulfill his role. They find Arya, they save her, Beric sacrifices his life, and the Hound drags Arya to safety. And Melisandre is there and tells them that Beric died for that purpose, to rescue Arya. And I think the same can be said for the Hound. I think the Hound has had a drastic influence on Arya's character, and I think we're going to see more developments with their relationship in future episodes. But Melisandre repeats that she will shut brown eyes, green eyes, and blue eyes, which I find funny because they reworked the prophecy from when she said it in season 3. And whether the producers of the show just shoehorned this prophecy in, I'm not going to debate that. I'm just going to say one opinion that I feel like cannot happen. I feel like Arya killing the Night King didn't have many stakes, and I feel like this prophecy was just thrown in there to have her do that and to do something cool. But I hope that brown eyes, green eyes, and blue eyes doesn't represent Walder Frey, Cersei, and the Night King. If Arya kills Cersei, her character would be given way too much. And she'd be a character that's getting in the business of so many story arcs that could have so much more significance. I hope that they reserve Cersei's fate for the Valonqar, Jaime Lannister. These characters have shared a womb together. They were in love. And Jaime's currently on a redemption arc, and I would love for him to go full circle and to face his sister. And much like he did the Mad King, kill his sister who has now become the Mad Queen. Showing what he did was right, and instead of him being remembered as a Kingslayer, he's remembered as somebody who's done something honorable. And that's something Jaime always wanted, to be remembered fondly in history.
Someone forgot to write down all your great deeds.
There's still time.
Is there? For a 40-year-old knight with one hand?
But then we see a lot of dragon scenes, and I think the key here is that Drogon and Rhaegal are getting really injured. And I think we'll find out that they're okay, but I don't know if these dragons will ever be 100%, especially when they're facing Cersei. So I think that puts Daenerys and Jon in a very vulnerable position, especially since Cersei's gonna have scorpion ballistas, and she can use these weapons to kill her dragons. It was already effective once, and I think it can be effective again. But Daenerys knocks the Night King off his dragon, and because Rhaegal is injured, he crashes and Jon falls off. We find out that the Night King cannot be killed by wildfire, and Jon has his moment to try and kill the Night King, but they have a similar moment like Hardhome, and the Night King leaves Jon fighting the dead. But then we get to the final stretch where people in the crypts are being attacked. Daenerys saves Jon as he tries to run to rescue Bran. Daenerys is knocked off her dragon because Drogon's been overwhelmed by whites, and it seems like there's no hope at all. We see amazing moments between characters. We see many fighting for their lives. We see Jorah defending Daenerys, the one person who he's loved and defended for this whole show. And we see Tyrion and Sansa, who were married and have been through a lot, spending what they think is their final moments together, and trying to summon up the courage to fight. We then see the Night King arrive at the Godswood, and Theon dies being a Stark, and I think that's very important to his character. We see Jon lose all hope and yell at Viserion. And no, I don't think he says go, go, go. He doesn't. I think this scene is just trying to convey that all hope is lost. And during all that, Arya kills the Night King. And while I don't like that this happened, I've come full circle and I can appreciate it for what it is. And I find it funny because this scene was foreshadowed in episode 1. Jon is standing exactly where the Night King is and Arya snuck up behind him. And I do find that very funny that Jon is in the Night King's place, because the two characters are very similar. The Night King on the exterior is ice, and represents death, but internally is made of dragon glass, which is fire. Jon's blood is Targaryen, fire, but externally, he identifies as a Stark. And Jon has died before and has been resurrected, and these characters have had many connections in the past. Maybe there'll be some twist where we find out that there needs to be almost a balance in this world, that winter needs to come. There needs to be a figure that represents death because there's a figure that represents life, and only death can pay for life. It's the balance between life and death, fire and ice, and Jon epitomizes all of it. Maybe Jon begrudgingly has to take the place as king, but maybe it's not king of the Seven Kingdoms, but the Night King of the dead. I don't see this theory as likely, but I find it very fascinating, and I think it's something that can be open to discussion. But we see the episode end with the remaining fallen. Jorah dies in Daenerys' arms, and Melisandre takes off her necklace as Davos watches her die at Winterfell. And the skies begin to clear, and now this leads us into facing off the key villain, Cersei, who has now gotten exactly what she wanted. The dead have killed a significant portion of her enemy's armies. The Dothraki are completely gone. Many of the Unsullied have died. Daenerys' dragons are injured, and Jon lost a lot of his armies as well. So now our characters are at a point where defeating Cersei seems almost impossible. And I think it will push some of them to a point of desperation, like Daenerys finally flying her dragon to the Red Keep. And maybe it will have some characters relying on the Golden Company. Harry Strickland is clearly upset with how Euron and Cersei are treating his men. The company was founded on Targaryen exiles, and I think they would flock to support someone who is Targaryen, who represents their best interests, and will let them come back to Westeros and settle that land, much like what Jon did with the wildlings. So I think the Golden Company could follow Daenerys, but I think if Jon's secret of being a Targaryen gets out, it's very compelling for Harry Strickland to follow Jon. And that would further push the drama between Daenerys and Jon, being allies but also fighting for the throne. But in this case, one character is fighting for it, and that's all Daenerys has ever done, is conquer and fight for the throne for the past 8 seasons. But Jon's never fought for any leadership. He was a bastard. He was always elected. He was elected to be commander of the Night's Watch. He was elected to be king of the North. And during all that, he was a leader that brought people together. And I think the same situation will happen here. Jon will be chosen or elected by the people without him even wanting to, and he would have to take that place as king. But that's just my thoughts on this episode. Please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.